Natalie Sideserf here of Sideserf Cake Studio, and I'm going to show you how I made an oyster platter cake. I've got a real oyster here, and not only am I going to use it as a reference to sculpt my cake oyster, but I'm also going to use it to make a mold of my oyster shell. I'm mixing food-safe molding putty, and then I'm working it around the shell just over those edges. I let it set for about 20 minutes, and then I just pop the shell right out of that mold, and I have the most perfect, beautiful oyster shell mold that you've ever seen. So I just clean it off, and then I pour in some melted white chocolate. I shake it around to get that chocolate into all those creases, and then I dump out any excess chocolate because I don't want this chocolate shell to be too thick.
1 hour later.
All right, so I let that chocolate firm up, and then I pop it out of the mold very carefully. If the chocolate breaks a little on the edges, I'm okay with that, but I want to try my best to keep it as clean as possible. And look at that! It's a beautiful shell without too much effort. To paint the shells, I'm using brown, green, red, and white food color. And then I just layer the colors starting with green. So I just found out that sometimes you will find a tiny crab inside your oyster. So this crab is called a pea crab. And apparently if you come across one while you're shucking an oyster, it's considered to be good luck and you're supposed to eat it. So pea crabs don't hurt the oyster, they're perfectly fine to eat, but personally, if I find a crab in my oyster, I'm not gonna be a happy camper, like at all. Like I'm cool with eating the crab and I'm cool with eating the oyster, but I am not a fan of surprises in my food. So if that happened to me, I don't think I'd be very happy. Now that the shells are painted, I just flip them over and then I paint the inside of the shell with pearl food color, which is an absolutely perfect name for the color of an oyster. Oysters are actually very pretty when you get a good look at them. Like they have all that texture and the colors. I think they're pretty. So these oysters are only about 3 inches, but some oysters can reach 14 inches long. Can you imagine seeing an oyster that's over 1 foot long? Ugh. Can you imagine eating one? Jeez. That's probably like about this size. No thank you. To make the actual oyster, I am making cake balls, which is crushed up yellow cake with some dollops of chocolate ganache. So I kind of just squish it all together. You kind of knead it. And it tastes delicious. I flatten the cake ball with my thumb, and then I cover it in ivory modeling chocolate. Then I just work it around the sides. Now I can finally take my shell and place the oyster in it. It's ready for the fine sculpted details and color. So I just go in with some sculpting tools and I'm adding some texture, and then I paint the oyster similar to what I see in a real oyster. While I do that, let's talk about the liquid found in an oyster. So did you think it was called oyster juice like I did? Well, you are wrong. Oysters are fancy, so the liquid must have a fancy name. And the liquid is actually called oyster liquor. Oyster liquor is the natural juice that's inside of an oyster that keeps it alive once it's out of the water. So you definitely don't want to dump that stuff out because it tastes absolutely amazing, and that's why it's referred to as liquor. Speaking of delicious oyster brine, let's make our cake version. I'm pouring 2 packets of gelatin over 6 tablespoons of water. I stir everything together and then I let the gelatin bloom. Then I microwave it until all the gelatin is dissolved in the water. You can see here that the gelatin is slightly yellow in color. So to color correct that, I add a super tiny itty bitty amount of purple food color because purple is the complementary color to yellow. That purple cuts the yellow tone, and I think that that slight gray definitely reads closer to a clear liquid than that yellow tone I started with. I thought for a long while how I could create a crushed ice effect, and as it turns out, all I had to do was cut up some gelatin. So I just take a pointed tool, or I could use a knife, and I just break up that gelatin once it's set. It's time to plate these oysters. And I have to admit, I think I got that color pretty spot on. I feel like if I left it yellow, it wouldn't look nearly as realistic. Now I can place my cake oysters right over top. And there you have it, an oyster platter cake. I absolutely love that the shell is made of chocolate. You've got that snappy chocolate and that soft cake ball. The texture is just amazing. And they're really fun to eat. Subscribe to this channel right now for a new realistic cake every week.